Hey there, this is Dave from The Greg and Dave Show. Thank you for listening to the following broadcast here on Public House Media.
This is Kim Meyer, the host of Choose to Rise here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Choose to Rise, where we talk about living with positive mindsets, how to increase our confidence, building our faith, and living out our life on purpose. A new show comes out via podcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And if you want to catch the episode live instead, stop by Public House Media around 6:45 Central Standard Time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday as well. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Choose to Rise. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy, and you probably are too. This is Lindsay, and I'm here today with both Emily and Elizabeth, and we're here to talk nerdy to you. This Sunday coming up is going to be Father's Day, so to celebrate all the fathers, we're going to chat about our favorite fandom fathers. Whether they're fathers by blood, by adoption, or important father figures, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the best and the worst, just as we did for our Mother's Day episode. First, we'll start out with our best father figures, and male role models, and Emily's got a list to share with us.
Yeah, all right, and these are in no particular order here. For my best fathers, my first one I picked is Mr. Incredible. Not only because the Incredibles 2 movie came out today, which I'm super excited to go see, but just because he made a really, really good change from the run-of-the-mill, like, father who's always just kind of trudging along, like, stuck in a rut kind of deal, to the father who encourages his children, wants to do what's best for his family no matter what. And he just he lets his family be who they really are. So in the Incredibles movie, he did spend a large portion of that lying to his family. So that was not a good thing, but he did think it was in the best interest of his family. He was making a lot of money doing what he was doing, but he didn't know who he was working for, so he didn't want to, scare his wife and say, hey, I'm kind of doing this sketchy work, but they pay real good, so... But after he got captured, though, his family did everything they could to come get him, and I think that's just a fantastic sign of a great father. And they loved him so much that even though they didn't know where he was or what he was doing, they still went after to find him. And once they did, he helped his children and his wife work together to defeat Syndrome, and they just all were better for it. He would do anything for them. And when he found out that when he thought that his wife and kids were dead, he was just so devastated, because he almost came to the point where he thought he was going to kill somebody, even though that's not his personality at all. And I just think that as a father, caring so much about somebody and then you find out that they're gone, it shouldn't change who you are. And he ended up not killing that, I don't know, what was her name, Mirage? He threatened to, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, because at the heart, he really is a good guy.
And I feel like there's also something to be said about him being in the state he was in the beginning of the movie, where he didn't really believe in what he was doing, and he wasn't really doing something that he believed in. He wasn't as in it as he was near the end. And it'd be interesting, too, to hear from our listeners as well as to how they feel about Incredibles 2 when it comes out, what they think of him as a father figure for the second movie, because it's possible it could change, but I feel like there's got to be some kind of correlation with Incredibles 2 coming out right for Father's Day, because you definitely are going to see lots of fathers out there this weekend.
Oh, I hope so. I mean, I bet there's a lot of people who saw Incredibles the first movie and are fathers now coming out to see it
when we were kids.
Second movie. Exactly.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Like my husband, who wasn't a father when he saw the first Incredibles, and now he is a father, and so, that's awesome.
Right. We're going to enjoy it so much. It's going to be so much fun.
Yes, so good.
Well, I think, all of the fathers, even on our best picks list, they aren't going to be perfect. There are going to be some things that they do that, maybe lying to their family or, doing certain things here or there, or, possibly enabling them that, isn't necessarily good things, but it's, how they handle the rest of everything that kind of says who they are and kind of speaks as to their nature. And from what I have seen from like the trailer for Incredibles 2, I believe the mom, Mrs. Incredible, now has, this big time, hero job. And so Mr. Incredible is the one like staying home and taking care of the kids and doing all of that. And I mean, being a stay-at-home parent is hard in general. And I think being a stay-at-home dad is maybe slightly more difficult just because, society doesn't really look at dads as a stay-at-home dad kind of thing. It's not really something that is necessarily very common or looked at as, something that is, commonly accepted. A stay-at-home
it's not
mom,
very mainstream.
Yeah, like a stay-at-home mom is one thing, but a stay-at-home dad, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird,
It's like, what's wrong with that dad?
Yeah, like,
Almost.
why isn't he working? It's kind of this preconceived notion in society that, the man is the breadwinner, so even when the mother does work, the father is still expected to work as well because, he has to take care of his family. But, there are many different ways to take care of one's family, and if one of the parents staying home is in the best interest of that family, even if that parent is the dad, that's what's best. And so I think that's likely the scenario that is going to be playing out in Incredibles 2. So it will be interesting to see how Bob is handling that.
Yeah, I'm interested. I didn't realize that was the kind of scenario. I haven't honestly actually watched any of the trailers just because I'm excited to see it like with fresh eyes because I've seen the first movie so much, and I'm just excited to see what they do in the second one. So I haven't seen any of the trailers. Like, I haven't paid close attention to them. So I'm excited.
I've been watching them obsessively just because I love the first Incredibles so much, and I've been waiting so long for this movie. So yeah, I've been watching everything I can get my hands on.
Very nice. Yeah. All right, so the next father that I picked, like I said, is not in any particular ranked order or anything. But this I picked is Jacob Carter from Stargate SG-1. He was the father of Samantha Carter, one of the members of SG-1 in Stargate SG-1, and he was kind of an absent father. I mean, so they come in to the relationship in the show where Sam and her father are not really on the greatest of terms. And it's almost that he seems disappointed that Sam isn't using her potential the way he thinks she should be. And it seems like, well, okay, so to understand this scenario, to be a member of the Stargate program, it's an extra super high top secret clearance type job from the military. And so Sam literally can't tell her dad anything about what she does. He thinks that she sits in a research lab doing math all day long. Really, she is going through a wormhole, traveling like millions of light years to other planets, fighting aliens, and discovering new technology all the time. And he thinks that she's just sitting cooped up in a lab all day. So, like, you can understand how he might feel a little bit disappointed because she had aspirations to be an astronaut. She's doing much more than being an astronaut, the way that the common world views being an astronaut, but he doesn't know that, and he can't know that until later on. I forget exactly what the scenario was. It's been a while since I've seen that episode, but he had some terrible illness of some kind, so either like cancer, I think it was some kind of cancer or something. And so he actually got clearance because he was part of the military as well. He was a high-ranking officer in the Air Force, just like his daughter became. And so he had some kind of illness and got clearance to go into the Stargate program and found out about a cure of some kind. I won't give away necessarily any of the details, because I think you should go watch it for yourselves. But, so he eventually became a collaborator with the Stargate program, found out exactly what his daughter is actually doing, and really just kind of turned his whole life around, from being this grumpy dude to being a really, really excellent negotiator, partner, and just a really awesome guy in general. He would do anything for anybody on his team. He's just so cool.
That's what we writers call character development.
Exactly! He did it! And it was great.
Yeah, I mean, it's, fathers aren't necessarily perfect, even the good ones, like I was saying before, and, especially in fiction, it's awesome to see, characters come from one place and end up in a completely different place, and it's good to see that transition happen naturally over time, for reasons, not just because, oh, well, it happened, and there it is.
Right, exactly. It wasn't like, oh, well, time has passed, so this person must be different now. No, there was an event that caused him to change, and it was a very significant change, and it repaired the relationship between him and his daughter, too, which is really, really cool. My next father that I chose is Jack Carter, another Carter. I know, it's such a common last name because it's so easy to use. Come on, writers. Elizabeth, I don't know, as a writer, how do you come up with last names?
Honestly, I go to online name generators and just hit generate until I find something.
Hey, that's probably better than using one of the most common last names in America. Anyway, so Jack Carter is from a show called Eureka, and I think I may have talked about this show before, but it is, I believe, on Amazon Prime right now, which is fantastic. It's a show about a secret town in America where some of the top scientists are hired by the government to do research, and they all live in this town. So it's this literal town of geniuses, and that's named Eureka. But anyways, Jack Carter is the main character. He was he was a state marshal, and he had a broken relationship with his daughter because he was just constantly working all the time. He and his wife had split up, and his daughter kept running away from his ex-wife's house, and so he picked her up somewhere, and they were driving off, and they stumbled upon Eureka, and basically just had to stay there because of the security clearance issues. But that actually caused them to repair that relationship. And Jack is actually a good guy, and he actually was able to he was just able to learn who his daughter really is. And I think that was so important because she was a teenager when she was running away from her mom's house. And so he didn't really understand her. I mean, teenage girls, who understands them? I don't even think teenage girls understand themselves. So, like, that's just a compliment to him at how awesome of a dad he is, because he became an understanding of his daughter during one of the most complicated times in her life. And they just grew really, really, really close because of that. And he didn't give up on her at all. Even when she was a screw-up, when he picked her up for running away for, like, the 4th time in 2 months or whatever it was, like, he didn't give up on her. He loved her no matter what. And even though the relationship wasn't great, he kept at it. And it was just really, really cool to see that.
It is. I mean, good fathers will always try. They will always put forth that effort,
Yeah, exactly. All right, and my last good father never actually got to be a father, but he would have been a great father. Wash from Firefly. It is rumored that during the movie Serenity, Zoe, his wife, was pregnant, but then we all know, sadly, what happened to Wash. But he would have made a fantastic father. I just know it. Like, he's hilarious. He plays with dinosaurs. Like, he just would have been a really great dad. I sometimes wish that Wash would have been my father. I mean, not really, but, like, because I love my dad. But, like, he would have been a fantastic dad.
He could be my dad. I wouldn't complain.
See, I kept going through who I thought would have been a good father or was a good father figure in Serenity and Firefly, and all I could think of was how Pastor Book was kind of like everyone's father.
Oh,
so
totally.
that's really all I had from that. I do agree with you that Wash would have been a great dad. And it's sad that he didn't get the opportunity. I feel like he would have been really fun and instructive and caring. He was caring for Kaylee, so I feel like that's really a cool quality that he had. But just sad that we didn't get that opportunity with him. So
yeah, exactly. Well, and even Mal kind of was a father figure for Kaylee a little bit.
And River's brother, why am I blanking on his name right now? Simon, thank you. Why did I blank on that? My brain just does not work sometimes. But I mean, he kind of became River's father more or less, because I mean, her parents just kind of was like, oh, whatever, you know, and then he was the one that took the initiative and was like, no, something is wrong. I have to go find her and take her and protect her, you know?
And the best part about that was that she had the opportunity to know her parents already, so she had that like ingrained within her as well. So she was old enough to have that idea already of what parents are and what they should be. So he really was just able to kind of step into that role and to step into caregiver for her, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean, he literally gave up everything for her. He left this, you know, this life behind him of being a doctor and this, you know, really high-paying job in high society, which, you know, in that world is pretty rare and very hard to get, and he gave it all up just for her. I mean, if that's not dad material, I don't know what is.
Right, totally. Like, seriously, when you say Simon gave up so much, like, if you haven't seen Firefly, I will say one more time, you should watch it so that you understand just how rare and how hard to come by the life that they had really, really was. And Simon gave all that up. He became a fugitive and made his sister a fugitive, but that was better for both of them. That's all I've got for my best fathers. Let's see, Elizabeth, what you have for best fathers then?
My first best father is actually a two-parter from my Mother's Day episode, and that's Jonathan Kent, who is the adopted father of Clark Kent, aka Superman from the DC universe. He immediately took in Clark as an infant, just, you know, no questions asked. And, you know, as he grew up, he cared for him and he guided him as if he was, you know, his own blood son. You know, I think a lot of people get too caught up and hung up on Jor-El and Lara, and they just kind of completely forget about the Kents, which is unfortunate because, you know, while what happened to Jor-El and Lara and, you know, the whole planet of Krypton is horrible and it's tragic, you know, Clark still had a normal childhood. He still had a normal upbringing. You know, he still had parents that loved him and cared for him and supported him, and you know, that's extremely rare in for the superhero genre to have, you know, both parents, you know, supportive of them like that. So, you know, I think it's important to acknowledge them, you know, even though, you know, they're obviously adopted parents, you know, they never treated Clark as if, you know, he wasn't really their son, you know?
Yeah, it just makes so much sense to give credit to Jonathan Kent for doing what he did. From what I hear, a lot of the Superman story is him trying to figure out what he can about his parents, even though they're gone. And there's still so much that he learned from his adoptive parents that makes him who he is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, Jonathan tried to instill in him, you know, the values that he was raised with, you know, which I think, you know, most parents try to do anyway, you know, but it's such a huge thing to take on and adopt a child. And, you know, even some parents who do adopt children, they aren't truly ready or willing to take on everything that's involved. And so for them to take on that task and not only, you know, take it on, but completely nail it, I think just speaks volumes as to who they are as people.
Yeah, totally.
My next one is also not a blood father, but he's technically not an adopted father either, but I still really wanted to include him on this list, and that's Alfred Pennyworth, who is a father figure and mentor to Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, also from the DC universe. Everything of who Bruce is really comes from Alfred. After the deaths of Bruce's parents, I mean, he really stepped up and took care of Bruce in ways that he didn't even necessarily need to. I mean, he was his legal guardian, but, you know, the way that he took care of him was much more than just that. You know, he truly became his father, and I think ultimately he had a closer relationship with him than Bruce even had with his own dad. You know, even though he had his dad up until he was, like, 8, 9 years old? You know, he still had a much deeper relationship, I think, with Alfred. And even though I kind of do throw a little side eye at Alfred, because I think, you know, he basically more or less enables Bruce with his whole Batman crusade. And, you know, which, I mean, I have my own opinions on that, and which I think it's ultimately kind of hopeless. But, you know, like I was saying earlier, nobody's perfect, and Alfred genuinely cares for him like Bruce was his own son, and, you know, ultimately I think he understands that if he was to speak out against Bruce's crusade, I think Bruce would ultimately choose the crusade over him, and he doesn't want that hurt. So I think that's likely why he does it, but, you know, I did have to throw that in and mention that there.
I think it's just awesome that Alfred is just there for him anyways, like, unconditionally, if that makes sense. I don't know a whole lot about the relationship there, but what I have seen makes it seem like to me that Alfred doesn't feel it's his place to speak against Bruce's crusade. And maybe that's the case, but maybe you're right, Elizabeth, and you think that he doesn't want to influence Bruce in that way, not that way. He doesn't want to be rejected by Bruce, I guess. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the Telltale games really nailed, I think, their relationship, because, you know, even though some of the circumstances were different regarding Bruce's parents, the game actually gives you a decision as to whether to, you know, leave behind the cowl of the Batman and to allow Alfred to, you know, kind of stay with you and be with you. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
You know, the game gives you a choice as to whether, you know, to put down the cowl of the Batman and, you know, Alfred won't leave you, or if you choose to stay as Batman, then Alfred has to leave, you know, just for his health's sake. And it's a huge decision, but, you know, honestly, when I was playing the game, I'm like, nah, it's not even something I have to think too much about. You know, I will always want Alfred to stay, because Alfred is his dad, and I know, you know, if I was in that position and I had that kind of a person as my dad, I wouldn't want them to leave.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, too.
All right, well, I'll move on to my third one. So, my third one, and I've just noticed that all of my good fathers aren't blood fathers. And only one is technically an legal adopted father, but I wanted to make sure that I chose something different than everybody else. So my third father is actually Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender. He's father to Luten, and he's also father figure and mentor to Zuko. And this poor guy, I love Iroh so much, but he endured so much tragedy in his life. The most impactful was the death of his son, Luten. For those of you who aren't totally familiar with Avatar: The Last Airbender, Iroh was a high-ranking general in the Fire Nation's army, and he laid siege to the Earth Kingdom city of Ba Sing Se. And he famously held that siege for over 600 days. And it was during that siege that Luten died. And after Luten, he received word that his son died, he completely gave up. He was just distraught, and he gave up the siege. And his brother Ozai used that to take away the birthright of Fire Lord from him, because originally Iroh was supposed to be Fire Lord, but Ozai used that as an excuse, and he took the title of Fire Lord from him, and that kind of changed a lot of what happened, I think, with the Fire Nation and what happened in the series. But despite all of that, Iroh never really gave up this optimistic spirit in the end, because he, kind of took in Zuko, and he took care of him, and he mentored him, and he did his best to kind of, guide him in the way that he should, in the way that Zuko didn't really get from his own dad, which I will talk about later. And he really became a huge part of Zuko's redemption arc. It was a very beautiful arc, and if anybody hasn't seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, I really encourage you to watch it, because even though it's a children's show, it really deals with a lot of not really mature subjects, but they really don't dumb it down for them. It deals with some very important subjects, and I think it's very important for everybody to watch.
Oh, I totally agree. I loved Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I love Uncle Iroh as well. I don't remember a whole lot about the background that you explained with the siege and his son Lu Ten, but I could totally understand how that would have, losing his son would have made him, have like a character change. But the show itself does a fantastic job with developmental things. The characters figuring themselves out and the relationships between those characters. We need to do an episode on this show just because there's so much good stuff to talk about. Like, I've watched this show with my daughter when she was 3. She's 4 now, and she still talks about it. And I find it's appropriate enough to watch with a child that young, even though it addresses topics that are a little more complex.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of almost similar to Batman the Animated Series in a way, in that they never shied away from difficult subjects, and they never dumbed it down. And to me, I think that's really what kids need,
Yeah, it's really important to have them understand it, and if we try to dumb it down, then they don't have that full understanding. So, totally true. And I love how Uncle Iroh is such a great mentor for Zuko, because at the beginning, when we first met Zuko, he was horrible, and then his relationship with Iroh totally helped him change and develop, and I think Iroh was a huge key player in that whole arc, and like you said, it was just beautiful.
He really never gave up, even when Zuko was this surly teenager, just like Jack Carter, he never really gave up on him.
Exactly.
And then my last good father, certainly not the last good father, but the last on my list is Bobby Singer, the beloved father figure and mentor to Sam and Dean Winchester from Supernatural. Because even though, he never technically adopted the boys, those were his boys. He treated them as if they were his own sons. He was there for them in ways that John just never was. And he even, occasionally when he had them, he gave them moments of normalcy. Like, I remember one episode in particular, he was supposed to take Dean shooting, but instead he took him to the park and played catch with him. Because he was like, you can always learn shooting later. You need to be a kid now. And that always just impressed me that, he was so understanding and conscientious that, even though these were a hunter's kids, they were still kids, and they still needed that, And as a result, they knew that they could depend on him. They could call him out of the blue just needing help on a case, and he would drop everything to help them, no matter how much trouble it got him into, which it was kind of covered in a somewhat comedic episode that showed, just what lengths he went to just in order to get them answers. He would really do anything for those boys. He literally died for them. And even after he died, and as he enjoyed the afterlife in heaven, he still answered their call when they were able to reach out to him, and he still helped them, even though it got him into trouble and essentially got him thrown into heaven's dungeons. He was still willing to throw away paradise for them, because a father's love can never be denied.
That sounds exactly like what a good father would do. Anything, whether it was against the law or not, kind of like Simon Tam going against the law to rescue River. if somebody is in need, you gotta go and help them out.
Yeah, he most famously said, family don't end in blood, and I kind of like to add in there that it doesn't always start there either.
Nice. Yeah.
So I don't have very many on my list.
Go ahead, though.
One of my favorite father figures was Bilbo Baggins to Frodo. I felt like he really took Frodo under his wing, and had a lot of stories to tell and a lot to teach Frodo. And the way it's portrayed, obviously in the movies, and I can't really speak too much for the books, but I do feel like the connection was definitely there, where not only did Frodo look up to him, but Bilbo had a lot to give to Frodo as well. As a male role model, as a father figure, all of that good stuff. I think it's important that we mention that we've had a little bit of a debate as to whether or not a father figure is good if he's not a good guy. Because if a good guy it makes a good child or a good kid, then that's one thing. But if a bad guy makes a bad guy, does that mean he was a good father to that kid because he wasn't a good guy? So now we're going to transition into our worst father figures in our fandoms. Mine, I wanted to start off with Thanos. We just saw the movies, and we know from the comics that he has an interesting relationship with both Gamora and Nebula, and he treats them both vastly differently, and he's not necessarily a good guy, but he wasn't really a good father.
Good guy.
He does. He thinks he's a good guy. He's got good intentions, I guess. So his intentions were good, but they were kind of crooked. He feels like he is a mercenary. He's doing what needs to be done. With Gamora, he's saving her from the poverty and the life that she was going to endure with her family, whom she loved, and he felt like that was a way of saving her. But simultaneously with Nebula, whether I believe that she is blood in some way, shape, or form. I think she might be a granddaughter. But the way that he treats her is, that she's never enough, that he doesn't love her, to use his own words, the way that he loves Gamora. And so the way that he treats them, being a father figure to both of them, isn't necessarily as a good father, but he really ended up with his own means. He did what he intended to do. So does that make him a good father or a bad one based off of his own intentions? So that we're there's my little tidbit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like from my perspective, he was a good father to Gamora, even though he was a bad guy morally, and a bad father to Nebula, still being a bad guy morally.
I would still say he's a bad father all around, because ultimately, and I base off of the comics, but he really had no love for anybody but death, and that influenced everything. That influenced how he treated his own children, whether adopted or otherwise. That it influenced the way he treated the whole universe. So yes, his intentions were to him good, but every villain is a hero in their own eyes. So you have to take their actions, despite their motivations, separately. Because even a good character can do good things and have morally gray motivations about it. As I think, Emily is going to discuss with one of hers. So, that's just how I look at it. So, in some ways, yes, he might have done some good things, but I ultimately look at certain actions and their motivations separately. And overall, I don't think he was a good parent. Because what makes a good parent to me is somebody who is supportive of their children and who is loving and who will, provide for them. And just because you may provide for them in certain ways doesn't necessarily make you a good parent. I kind of have experience with this myself where, yes, my father provided for us financially, but he was not really there. He was very manipulative and emotionally and spiritually abusive. So, despite the fact that he did do some good things for me, it doesn't cancel out the negative. It doesn't make him a good father, and I think to him it makes him a good father. But, to me, I can say that no, he wasn't a good father to me,
I guess that makes sense. There's a lot of talk about the perspective it comes from, but in the end, as a result of the father's actions, was it in the best interest of his family, I guess, is the final question. And I guess, when I think about that, I'll just get right in on my worst fathers that I picked. The first one I have is Bartimus Crouch Sr. from Harry Potter. First of all, his son became a Death Eater. I don't know much about, in general, we don't know much about the whole backstory of how his son became a Death Eater or any of the childhood of Barty Crouch Jr. But I kind of feel like there is a lot to say about somebody's parenting if their child becomes an evil person. But then after Barty Crouch Jr. was taken out of Azkaban, first of all, it was Barty Crouch Sr.'s wife's, so Mrs. Crouch's dying wish. She had some very terrible sickness, and it was her dying wish that her son not rot away in Azkaban, even though he deserved to be there because he went to Azkaban as a Death Eater, and he got that sentence for life. They swapped places with each other, so his mom and Barty Crouch Jr. traded places with each other, so she was in Azkaban instead. But Barty Crouch Sr., even after his son came out of Azkaban, didn't welcome him back into the fold and say, "I'm gonna be a good example for you," or anything like that. He kept him hidden, well, understandably, because he wasn't supposed to be out of Azkaban, but he just kind of kept him sedated, groggy through the Imperius Curse, I believe. If I'm incorrect, please correct me on that. But he kept him under an invisibility spell and basically made his son Winky the house elf's problem. Now, how do you think a really powerful Death Eater is going to be handled by a house elf? House elves are great, but they have their limitations, So I feel like he just kind of got his son out of prison and was like, all right, I did I've satisfied my wife's last wish. I'm done now. Which is a terrible husband thing to do too. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, why? I mean, obviously, she was dying, but still, I would be talking to her and be like, sorry, no. we're gonna have to figure out something else for your last wish because I'm not letting you die in Azkaban.
Right. I wouldn't want my wife to die at Azkaban. Not that I have a wife, but I wouldn't want my husband to die there for sure. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I feel like, he was likely the kind of father that was very distant and cold and, just wasn't really there and available for his son. And I kind of, maybe it's my own headcanon, but I kind of picture, Barty Crouch Jr. as just really craving some sort of acceptance and some sort of fulfillment that he wasn't getting from Barty Crouch Sr. And that's why he joined the Death Eaters, because he felt that sort of camaraderie and that sort of closeness that he didn't get from his family.
Mm-hmm. I could totally see that. Another thing, Barty Crouch Sr. didn't even realize that his son was impersonating a Hogwarts professor for an entire school year. That's just how little attention he paid to his own son.
Yeah, that was just ridiculous, and it was only given away, almost towards the end, and obviously he ended up dying for it because he was probably, he recognized that his father was going to turn him in, but, to wait that long, I know he had fired Winky, but what was he doing to take care of his son? Did he have another house elf that he had assigned, or I'm not sure. I'm not sure what exactly he was expecting to happen after he let go of Winky.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd think he would take care of those sorts of things. But like you said, I feel like he was one of those distant fathers who never really, maybe he just like never learned how to be a father because he was too busy leveling up in the Ministry of Magic, climbing the ladder to become like, whatever his position was in the ministry. But then, so my next, another character from the Harry Potter universe here, I might ruffle some feathers here, but I really, really think this is true. My next worst father is more of a father figure. It's Dumbledore, which I may ruffle some feathers here, but I think he had good intentions because he wanted to get rid of Voldemort. He had the greater cause in mind, but he essentially raised Harry knowing that Harry was going to have to die. Didn't let Harry in on that certain parts of the plan that I think Harry probably would have been able to handle. And I feel like raising a child, and he wasn't actually a father, but Harry looked up to him like a father because he didn't have a real father of his own anymore. James died when he was like a year old, so what was he going to do, Somebody had to fill that role, and Sirius filled a certain aspect of that for him, but he didn't have Sirius in his life until he was like 14. So Dumbledore filled in a lot of that, and Dumbledore used Harry in a good way, but not in an appropriate way for a child necessarily. He essentially like led Harry on a wild goose chase throughout his entire time at Hogwarts, and didn't explain anything to Harry until after Harry had died.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those cases, where you look at actions and their motivations separately. And, while obviously his actions, he was acting in the greater good. And while he did, support Harry and offer him genuine advice and mentorship, at the same time, a lot of his motivations were kind of morally gray because, he's essentially just raising him like a lamb for slaughter so that he could die at the appropriate time. And it's like, it's not really a good thing, necessarily.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. So that's, Dumbledore was a great wizard, and he had a great plan to save the wizarding community. As a father figure to a child, it wasn't a good thing in general. It was overall a good thing, but not...
I think people sometimes forget that the story of Harry Potter is told through the eyes of Harry Potter, and when a story is told like that, it's what we call an unreliable narrator, whereas the narrator does not know everything that's going on. They're only seeing things from their own perspective. We don't see things from a greater perspective. So, certain characters are seen in certain ways, but that may not be everything that they are. And when you really examine Dumbledore and his character and who he is and what he does, he's really a lot more morally gray than I think most people really think of. Because while he does great things and while he, does his best to work toward the greater good, some of the things that he does is a little questionable and a little shady, and especially the way that he goes about certain things. Kind of like getting the ring, from the Gaunt family, and trying to track down all their Horcruxes, and the way he kind of hides a lot of things away. Sometimes maybe necessarily just to keep it secret so it doesn't get out, but some people could definitely help him, and he takes on, I think, some things just unnecessarily so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Now, I was trying to come up with another bad father, or another bad father figure, so I wouldn't have all Harry Potter examples, but I just couldn't really come up with another one. So, Elizabeth, you can go on ahead with yours.
Well, that's okay, because I have quite a few here myself. My first one is actually a little similar in some ways to Thanos, but he is from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and that is Fire Lord Ozai. He is the father of Azula and Zuko, and he's obviously leader of the Fire Nation. And he is very complicated. He, kind of similar to Thanos, he always blatantly prefers Azula, kind of pitting brother against sister in some ways, and he just completely undercuts a lot Zuko's accomplishments and, kind of makes him feel lesser than, kind of like he does with Nebula. Thanos does with Nebula, excuse me. And, he kind of just praises and spoils Azula, kind of to the point where she's almost sociopathic. And she, towards the end of the series actually has a mental breakdown because of, everything that, he kind of ends up putting on her. And one of the most horrible things he ended up doing was when Zuko spoke out against one of his general's plans at a war meeting that would have cost needless lives. He accepted the challenge to an Agni Kai, which is a very serious fire duel. And Zuko refused to fight his father because, it's his father. He's, even though, he did not treat him very well, he still loved his father. But, Ozai wasn't one to back down, and he ended up severely burning and scarring Zuko before he banished him. And he sent him on the seemingly impossible quest of finding the Avatar before he would allow him to come back home, which, at that part in the series, as far as anyone knew, the Avatar was dead and hadn't reincarnated. So essentially he was sending him on this wild goose chase, intending him to never come back home, which, that's horrible. Being voiced by Mark Hamill doesn't give him a pass in my book.
I was going to mention, I was going to make sure you knew that Mark Hamill was his voice too, because, that doesn't give him a pass, unfortunately. That's just the character and how he was written, but it did give a lot of development to the storyline and to how things played out with the whole story of Avatar: The Last Airbender too. And he was, like you said, a lot like Thanos. He definitely had his favorite in Azula, and she was totally a sociopath. Oh my goodness, she was nuts. And that definitely became clear in the later seasons. And Zuko, not knowing anything else for what a father should be, he still loved his father during the duel, and then he became bitter because of what his father did to him.
Well, yeah, I think your father, severely scarring your face up would definitely have a huge effect on you and your whole outlook, which, kind of, it really affected his character and his character's development, and it, I don't really want to give too much away, but his entire arc, I think, is honestly one of my favorite parts of Avatar: The Last Airbender, because it shows that, you don't have to come from a good family to, end up as a good person. You can go through some really horrible things growing up, and you can come out all the better on the other side,
Oh, totally, exactly. It's those defining moments in life where, something horrible happens. You have that crossroad, like, which path do I take? Do I follow the path of badness? Or, you don't always know which way the path is going to lead, but you have to make that choice either way, and whatever happens after that happens.
Oh, yeah. And, I think Zuko, because of Uncle Iroh, like I, mentioned earlier, I think, he really took over for Ozai, and he was the huge defining force in Zuko's life later on. And he was the one that influenced him more than Ozai. And I think that's, really important to, point out that, if you aren't going to step up and be a good parent, then, somebody may step into that role for you.
Exactly. Totally. Which is why I love Uncle Ozai. No, I don't love Ozai. I love Uncle Iroh so much.
Yeah, and my second option, again, had a very excellent stand-in that I also mentioned earlier, and that's John Winchester, who is the father of Sam and Dean Winchester and Adam Milligan from Supernatural. And much has been said and debated about John's behavior over the years in the series. Whether, some people have painted him from violently abusive, and some have just said, oh, well, he was just simply absent. But I prefer to look at concrete evidence from what we see in the series. And from all the flashbacks and everything, it was, very apparent that he simply, at some points just left his young sons completely alone to go hunting. He would leave them in hotels, he would leave a gun for Dean and say, just look after your brother. And, sometimes he wouldn't even leave them with sufficient food, which caused, at one point caused Dean to be arrested and sent to a boys' home because he was caught stealing bread and peanut butter to feed him and Sam. And, when John came back for him, all he did was essentially just berate him for getting caught. You know, he treated Dean much harsher, putting these unrealistic expectations on him and not even really acknowledging his accomplishments. And that upbringing had, you know, lasting effects on the boys, at some points making them almost dangerously codependent on each other because, you know, Dean was essentially the father figure to Sam growing up, and, you know, to Dean, his whole task, his whole mission was take care of Sam. You know, that was just drilled into him, you know, even from when he was 4 years old. Take care of Sam. You have to take care of Sam. You know, he ended up selling his soul for him. You know, so, I mean, at the end of his life, John did end up, you know, doing one last good deed for them, and that was, you know, Dean was essentially dying, and he sold his souls so that Dean could live and he would die. But, you know, even though he allowed himself to die, not only die, but go to hell, it like I said, it doesn't change the fact that he was absent and at the very least emotionally abusive to his boys throughout their life. And a sacrifice at the end for their sake, it doesn't change that and suddenly make everything okay.
Right, exactly. I mean, on the one hand, he realized, I think, a little bit of what happened, but he didn't, I don't know the whole scenario, but I feel like he should have at least said sorry. I don't know if he did or not.
No, he didn't really. And in fact, before he died, he didn't even tell them what he did. He just, you know, gave them one last, you know, kind of goodbye moment. He made sure that Dean was alive, and then he walked off knowing that, you know, he was about to die. And that's it. He didn't really tell them anything. Kind of like Dumbledore. He really didn't let them in on a lot of information. And, you know, I think they really would have benefited from knowing that. But he was extremely secretive about a lot of things.
It seems like he was almost trying to protect them from it, kind of like how Dumbledore was trying to protect Harry, and it turned out being worse in the end.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to note, that, you know, it's kind of natural to want to protect your children, but you can't protect them from everything. And the best thing that you can do is to prepare them, you know, instead of just keeping them in the dark.
Oh, totally. That's such an important thing. Was, you know, preparedness versus protectedness. There is a thing called overprotection.
Definitely. And my third father on this list isn't necessarily overprotective, but he is definitely an absentee father, and that is Howard Stark, who is the father of Tony Stark, aka Iron Man from Marvel. He was just kind of a workaholic, and he never really made any efforts to connect with his son, which, you know, obviously carried over and caused Tony a lot of issues to work through later in his life. And I mean, sure, Howard was a genius, and he made a lot of great innovations that helped shape the world. He came up with the super soldier serum, which, you know, gave the world Captain America. But, you know, at the same time, that doesn't negate, you know, his absenteeness. You know, Tony was extremely smart, you know, as well, you know, and he probably got that from Howard. And, you know, that could have been a huge thing for them to bond over, you know, but Howard just never really put in any effort. And, you know, while that obviously shaped Tony and some of the things that Tony did, I think that put him through some unnecessary things to go through in his childhood.
Yeah, it's kind of too bad that was the situation, because then Tony kind of mimicked his father in a way, in being you know, very like a playboy, aloof. Kind of aloof. Yeah, like aloof, and he was a playboy, and he was eccentric. Not being eccentric is a bad thing, but he was eccentric to a negative degree until he had one of those defining moments where he had to, like, really see what was actually going on.
Yeah, and, you know, hopefully Tony won't, you know, end up doing something similar with his own children. But I think at least in the MCU, he'll be okay, because I think, like I mentioned in our Infinity War episode, he's kind of reached that point where he's ready to be a father. And, yeah. I mean, the comics, obviously, I mean, everything changes every so often. They're always rebooting everything. So, I mean, everything at one point is canon and not canon. So I admit I don't know a whole lot about that aspect of the comics. That's one of the things I don't necessarily know. But, you know, I have hope. I have hope for Tony as a character.
Yeah, I would agree too.
And my fourth and last one is another comic father, and that is Ra's al Ghul, who's the father of Talia and Nisa, and the grandfather of Damian Wayne from AKA the fourth Robin, or actually not quite the fourth Robin. He's the most recent Robin from DC, and Ra's is a villain, and his goal, at its very core, similar to Thanos, is good. You know, he wants to make the world a better place. You know, he wants to make the world, you know, kind of akin to a paradise for everybody. But unfortunately, the way that he goes about it is to try to remake the world in his image and to basically exterminate everything that doesn't jive with that. You know, he heads the League of Assassins, and he uses them to try to manipulate world events to come out the way he wants them to be. And, you know, his mission just blinds him to the needs of his children and his grandson. He essentially makes Talia a mindless drone. He drives Nisa away from him, and he basically more or less has a helping hand in molding Damian to be like the ultimate douchebag, because, oh my god, Damian is such a douchebag. I cannot stand Damian, I'm sorry. But anyway, he really never comes around, and it's actually during the Batman Beyond series that it really shows that he will sacrifice everything in order to further his mission, because Ra's al Ghul is extremely old. He's hundreds of years old, and he, you know, every time he gets old and comes near death, or even becomes injured to the point of coming near death, he revives himself in a Lazarus pit. But, I mean, the Lazarus pit has limits, and in the Batman Beyond series, it's come to the point where his body has deteriorated to the point where the Lazarus pit can't revive it anymore. And at that point, he willingly swaps minds, essentially, with Talia. And he gains her youthful body, and he condemns her to die in exchange, so that he can further his mission. And I mean, how horrible is that you have brainwashed your child to give up their entire life for you and your mission? That is horrible.
It just sounds awful, and sounds like almost similar to the Dumbledore thing, how he has his mind set on solving the world, and he just has to complete that mission. But I do need to ask, though, is this the same Ra's al Ghul as the one in Arrow? This is the DC universe, but I don't know if you've seen Arrow, the TV show from Netflix.
I have not. So, if his name is Ra's al Ghul, it's probably the same one, I would venture to say. but yeah, he's not a good father at all. You know, he's very single-minded in that, you know, the mission is the most important thing above all else, above, you know, anybody's comfort, above anybody's needs. The mission of making the world a better place in his eyes, you know, is his ultimate goal.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it would be the same as in the Arrow TV show, but then in the Arrow TV show, it takes a little bit of a different direction with Ra's al Ghul, because there's a character played by John Barrowman, who is a villain in that show, who joins up with the League of Assassins, and he becomes Ra's al Ghul, who is also the apparent father of Thea.
So they're doing the whole Batman Begins, Ra's al Ghul is just a title thing? Oh, that's just ridiculous.
But character John Barrowman played in that series was a terrible father as well, because he is basically trying to accomplish everything just in order to reunite with his daughter, who was raised being the daughter of somebody else, which would have been Oliver Queen. Yeah, so Thea Queen and Oliver Queen. Thea, apparently, it was not really a queen. She was really Queen's best friend's daughter, but from the same mother. So that's what they were doing in the show. But the character that was played by John Barrowman, I forgot his name off the top of my head right now. I just thought of it as you were talking about Ra's al Ghul, because he's the only character that I remember seeing as Ra's al Ghul, because I haven't seen any of the Batman stuff.
Well, Batman the Animated Series does cover him a little bit, and like I said, he also makes an appearance in Batman Beyond. And, I mean, both of those series are incredible. I mean, I highly recommended for everyone to, check them out. They really nail a lot of the characterizations from the comics, and they even carry over some of the story arcs from the comics as well. It's extremely well done. I mean, even though, these were, cartoons done in like the 90s, early 2000s or what have you, they still hold up today, with both the art style and the stories and everything, really.
Well, that's really awesome that they do a good job like that. Yeah, I have to check them out. That'd be fun.
Definitely. So, why don't you talk nerdy to us? Who do you guys think that, is a good father, or who would make a good father potentially? And who do you think is a bad father? You can find Beauties and Headcanons on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr to share your nerdy topic suggestions. And also subscribe to this podcast and others from Public House Media on iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and wherever good podcasts are found. Also, we have merch now. You can go to thephmedia.com and click on the store tab, and we have t-shirts, phone cases, mugs, bags, just about everything you can think of. It has our logo on it, so go and buy something and rep the show. We also love feedback, so if you like this episode, or even if you didn't, please give us a rating and a review so that we can keep making great episodes for you. I'm Elizabeth, and thanks for getting nerdy with us on Beauties and Headcanons.